running from all of our problems. But it is time that we solve them. It's all based on your perception, whether or not I am deceptive. We all know that we are crowded, so an idea of death is sprouted. Knowing the difference between right and wrong is what can keep us together long. La 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 la. La 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 la. No matter where you will run to, just know that the end will find you.
This is Deception, an upcoming Minecraft series made by Izzy Not Present. I want to be absolutely clear that you should watch the first episode before watching my video. I don't want to spoil anyone's first watch. It'll be the first link in the description. With that out of the way, hi, I'm Dragon, and this is my Deception Theory video. Let's start with a quick recap for those that have seen it and just need a refresher. We begin with an explanation of the world. The government has made a system to reduce the large population size. That system is a game of tag, where the roles tagger and runner are randomly chosen, and each given a red and blue wristband, respectively. Runners must hide and not be tagged, while taggers must tag a certain number of runners. The message closes by saying that this should be encrypted into your brain and reveals that it's most likely Anaya making this message, as they both have the same goal: to destroy the system. Then the actual story starts, with our main character Anaya sitting at her computer before her friends Iris and Neil arrive. After some talking, the rest of the group arrives, including Valentine, Dexter, Elena, and Floyd. Everyone is a runner other than Dexter. Elena brings up that she's been seeing more taggers, and then Iris urges them to leave since she sees taggers outside. The group leaves and stumbles upon a cabin which Elena suggests that they stay at. After they get the fire started, Elena asks if anyone has seen Neil since he disappeared. Anaya decides to look for him, and Dexter follows her. They eventually find Neil, who was taking some alone time, and take him back to camp. With everyone regrouped, Anaya tells everyone that she plans on destroying the system, to which Neil agrees. After that, they go to bed. Everyone except Anaya, who decides to look around the cabin a little more, finding a sheet of paper on a board. She then hears a noise and finds two taggers trying to get in through the window. Luckily, there's a knife sitting on the counter, which she uses to push them back outside. Anaya warns them to go away, but a fight breaks out, where she defeats the main tagger with a shock. Then both taggers run away. Anaya justifies the shock as
must have carried the static or something.
In the morning, the group travels in search of the command building, in the hopes that it can help them end the game. Elena confronts Anaya about the noises last night, so Anaya gives a half-truth, deciding to keep this shock secret. The gang finds an abandoned town, so they split up to look for resources. Dexter finds Anaya some water, and they move on to the next store. Meanwhile, Floyd and Valentine find a clothes store and end up finding a sleeping bag before leaving. Back to Anaya's group, who were looking around a sketchy store until they hear a noise. And the same two taggers are back. There's a struggle in the store until Anaya is cornered by the main tagger and gives up.
My pleasure. It was nice having this little reunion with you. Runner.
Okay, that's the end of the recap. Again, if you're still here and haven't seen the actual video yet, I strongly recommend you do so. And with that, let's start. Already? I just got here. To start this off, I want to say that I won't really be focusing on the shady government itself. If you want that, there's a great video by Amber in the description. This video is to do with the main story itself, trying to answer some of the questions left behind by the first video. I'll start with admittedly my weakest theory, which is that Anaya isn't really part of the system. This theory hinges on the colored words in the text. The blue words in order are present, tagger, tagged, tag, banned, pshun, dies. What is pshun dies, you ask? Well, it's half of the word deception. On to the red words, it gets more interesting with words such as handle, fun, tag, is he not, runner, sight, runners, wrist, system, deception. Now, you may look at these words and think that I'm insane. I am, but that's beside the point. The last part of the red says runner's wrist system deception. I think this could mean that the runners have some sort of unknown advantage since the system heavily favors taggers as we know it. This could easily be a coincidence though, since I am cherry picking words, but it's still strange that it would say something like that. If only it were true. Anyway, what's interesting to me about the letter colors isn't actually any of that. It's how the title card of Deception changes from in the beginning having blue and then red, but at the end it's red to blue, almost implying a switching of sides. I think the switching sides thing would probably be in reference to Anaya since she is the one who mentioned it. So why do I think Anaya is outside of the system? Simple. She's the only one who can switch sides, which is probably what happens after the final scene, but more on that later. As for right now, I want to talk about the note in the cabin. We have no real way of knowing what was on that paper, but it clearly got Anaya's attention. Some people speculate it's something about the system, which is about as possible as anything else. My original thought was that it's a love letter by Dexter, since we can see him writing in the background after the group first arrives at the cabin. In fact, that's the only other time we see a paper like that, so it's also possible. To expand upon the idea that it's about the system, maybe the paper is the reason Anaya doesn't put up a fight at the end. It could have said something about what happens after being tagged, but it would be stupid to trust a random piece of paper that could have just been tagger propaganda. I don't know if it's getting faster, or... I'm getting slower. Now I'll explain what I think is happening with the increased number of taggers. I don't really think there are more taggers actually. Instead, I think it's more taggers being drawn to the area where the group resides. This is probably happening because the government wants to get rid of Anaya. The idea of encryption has been confirmed as the way the system works, so it's not a stretch that the government would encrypt the location of a target inside the taggers' minds. But why would the government want to go after this random teenager? They probably know more about Anaya's shock ability than she does herself, and it's somehow going to be a threat to the system. Either the shock ability or something else, but both her and the government know that she's going to become an actual threat to the system. Plus, there are so many glitching effects throughout the video, they must mean something. I think it symbolizes Anaya being a glitch in the system. We already established that the explanation was probably by Anaya, and that's where most of the glitch effects occur. So I don't think that this is a stretch. And surely many others have tried and failed to stop the game, but there's something different about Anaya. Why else would she be taking her friends, who are almost all runners, to end the game if she doesn't have any trick up her sleeve? Sure, it could just be naivety, but at that point it would be bordering on idiocy. Idiot! Why did I remember? I wasn't supposed to remember. The cycle just started. Now onto my main theory, which is that Neil isn't the normal bread-loving guy he appears to be. I'll start with the thing most people noticed, which is that him disappearing for some alone time is really suspicious. He says,
I was worried it was someone else.
but as you can see, when he appears, he's completely out in the open. I think Neil was expecting someone else, like he said, and I think that someone else was the taggers that would break in later that night. He probably agrees to go back with Anaya and Dexter since he didn't want them to see the people he was meeting with. But since this meeting never happened, why did they break in anyway? Well, they probably agreed on a backup plan. The taggers would watch for the smoke to know that Anaya's friends were there, and when it stopped, they would make their move. This is plausible since it's Neil who suggests that they put out the fire. But what if the group decided to camp out somewhere else? If they kept going, Neil's plan would never work. If I kept going. Neil had this planned out though. Before they left town, he said,
I saw them this morning.
I believe this was him telling Elena about the cabin. He probably didn't let Elena in on the whole plan, but told her about a great cabin they could use if taggers became an issue. Keep in mind, Elena is the one who said,
I think this cabin can hold us over for now.
She probably realized that it was weird for Neil to tell her about this place right before they ended up staying there. This realization led her to worrying about his whereabouts.
Have you guys seen Neil? He kind of disappeared.
This also probably led her to being restless as she...
Heard some noises last night.
But why would Neil do all this? Does he really just hate his friends? Is he really just cartoonishly evil? I don't think so. Let's go back to the cabin for a moment, right after Anaya tells her friends of her goal.
I agree. I lost so many people in my life.
He seemed really sincere when he said that. In fact, I think he's had that goal for a while before Anaya ever mentioned it. He's dealing with so many losses, which I think only strengthened his resolve to destroy the system. Neil is smart though. He knows that his group of friends, who are almost all runners, stand no chance at ending the game. Of course, he doesn't know about Anaya's powers, so he tries to make do with what he had. He also knows that Dexter is a ticking time bomb, and if Neil stays, he's gonna be the first to be tagged. I mean, look at this. Dang. So, what do you do when your friends are all doomed? You make new ones. Neil made a deal with 2 of the taggers where, in exchange for his protection, he would give them a ton of free tags. During the break-in, you can hear the taggers say,
Do you see anyone yet?
I don't think so. I told you this place is abandoned.
So the main one was probably the one who made the deal with Neil, while the other one was left clueless. Probably for good reason.
I'm Elias, and here...
Anaya does bring up a good point.
I just find it awfully stupid that you guys didn't just use the wide open doorway.
I don't think that this was out of stupidity, though. Instead, I think Neil left that knife that Anaya found at the window for the taggers just in case something went wrong. For example, Dexter fighting them. All of this evidence points to Neil making this plan not to backstab his friends for the fun of it, but to get better odds of actually beating the system. In fact, I think Anaya's and Neil's goals are one and the same. The only difference was how far they were willing to go. I had the same goal, but it was never meant to be me. I lied to it. I told it I just needed more time. I knew I was lying. I never even had a chance. It was supposed to give me better odds. Now I have this red band around my wrist. Better odds my ass. Why am I doing this? This world was doomed from the start. I was just hoping in my head I could come up with some way that this one is saved. I'm not sure anymore. And what about the ending? Anaya almost certainly gets tagged. What happens next? Maybe, like I suggested earlier, she switches sides since she's the glitch in the system. Maybe she also goes to a dark void whenever she... No. This is a curse suffered by me alone. It better be. But if all that evidence didn't win you over, I do have a little more. After Neil takes Dexter and Anaya to an abandoned store that even Anaya says was
Sketchy.
the same taggers appear. They probably had this spot pre-planned as a backup, which is why Neil wasn't asking questions about the break-in since it didn't work. You can see during the chase that the tagger that's chasing Neil and Dexter stops for a moment. Possibly just him getting caught on a block, but it could also be to allow Neil to have a more believable escape. But the real smoking gun comes at the very end, where you can see Neil staring at his friend as she's about to get tagged. You might think he's waiting for a sneak attack, but for that to work, he would have to move closer. On top of that, if he tries to attack a tagger, he's obviously going to be tagged. If he really was trying to help her, he'd tell Dexter to help since he's a tagger, and Neil would continue to loop the tagger around the store. Also, it wouldn't make sense for Neil to sit there watching Anaya get tagged since he's supposedly getting chased himself. While I'm sure Dexter could stall the tagger without too much issue, he also wouldn't be too upset if he accidentally let Neil get tagged. Dexter would be getting rid of Neil, who he hates, and not get any blame for it. So in that case, none of this makes sense unless Neil is working with the taggers. But if that's true, he's probably doomed. Think about it. If taggers have no real threat other than getting some number of runners by the end of the time, why hasn't a group of taggers already ended it? There's clearly some reason for that, so Neil is probably being played. His desperate plan is destined for failure despite how much he's given to try and make it work. But hey, that's just how it is sometimes. After all, everyone runs out of breath at some point.